Save on your student loans.
So now,
well, by the way, I did. I understand. Look, I'm not going to judge whether or not it was appropriate, whether she thought it was sufficient. But I said privately what I've said publicly. I am sorry she was treated the way she was treated. I don't think I treated her badly. I took on her opposition, what I couldn't figure out how to do, and we still haven't figured it out.
Yeah.
How do you stop people from asking inflammatory questions?
Welcome back to AM Joy. One day after officially ending months of speculation and entering the 2020 presidential race, former Vice President Joe Biden went on The View and confronted one of the biggest controversies of his political past. And still, he was not quite able to outright apologize to Anita Hill for how he treated her when she testified against Clarence Thomas during his Supreme Court nomination, his Supreme Court confirmation hearing in 1991. Biden was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time, but failed to stop Republican lawmakers from barraging Anita Hill with incendiary and at times sexually inappropriate questions. Biden also did not call corroborating witnesses who were willing to testify. This week, Biden revealed that he spoke with Professor Hill on the phone a few weeks ago. And she says, for the first time, Biden apologized to her personally. But again, his apology was for how she was treated. Hill told the New York Times that the call left her feeling deeply unsatisfied. Meanwhile, Biden is trying to move on and crediting Professor Hill's courage for the work that he's done to address sexual harassment and violence against women.
Take a look at what's happened. What I did when we got through that god-awful experience she'd been through, she's one of the reasons why we have the Me Too movement. She's one of the reasons why I was able to finish writing the Violence Against Women Act. She's one of the reasons why I committed, that was over. There'd never be a Judiciary Committee I was involved with that didn't have women on it. So I went out and got a commitment that the women I campaigned for would come on the committee. Yeah. So she's responsible for significant changes, and she deserves credit for it.
Joining me now is Ambassador Carol Moseley Braun. In 1992, she became the first African-American woman elected to the United States Senate and was appointed to the Judiciary Committee, where she worked alongside then-Chairman Biden. She is a surrogate for Joe Biden's presidential campaign. And Ambassador Moseley Braun, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Joy. It's wonderful to be with you again, and I am happy to be here. But I understand I just volunteered for Joe Biden because I believe in his candidacy. So.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you saying that, because I recall that you were inspired by Anita Hill's example and really by the abuse that she took in standing up and telling her story and facing down Clarence Thomas, who was at that point a future Supreme Court justice, taking the Thurgood Marshall position. So he had a lot of support from African Americans at that time because they didn't know how right-wing his policies were going to be. And so you were inspired by her when you ran for the United States Senate. And yet, at this point, Anita Hill and you are on opposite sides of the Joe Biden question. Here's what she told the New York Times. She said, "I cannot be satisfied by simply saying I'm sorry for what happened to you. I will be satisfied when I know there is real change and real accountability and real purpose to correct the issues that are still there." And one more clip. She says on whether or not Biden's role in the hearing should actually disqualify him as president, she says, "I'm biased entirely to say whether everyone should think this is disqualifying. I'm really open to people changing, but it's not enough to say I couldn't have done anything then. What I want to hear from him and what I want to hear from all the candidates is that this problem that we're experiencing now, that we're more aware of than ever before, problems of sexual harassment and sexual assault, women's integrity to protect their own bodies, that this is a big problem." What do you make of Joe Biden's attempt to apologize Anita Hill and the fact that she said it's not enough?
Well, let me say at the outset, that had to be one of the worst experiences of her entire life. That whole hearing was just grueling, even just to watch. And to have been in that frying pan had to have been just really horrible for her. Having said that, what she went through changed things for the better for millions of people, including myself. I know for a fact there's no way I would have gotten elected to the United States Senate if Anita Hill had not stood there and gone through what she went through. It changed the climate, it began to change the culture, and it was a positive thing. You know, change happens all the time, but what she did was she inspired positive change for our society, and I'm grateful to her for it. Having said that, again, she's entitled to her opinion. I hope she forgives Joe Biden. Forgiveness, as you know, is something you look forward to and not backwards at. It has to do with the future and not what has happened already. But I hope that she can reach a level of forgiveness for him, because I believe he is the most qualified of all the candidates. And I have friends who are running in this race for president. But he's the most qualified candidate. He's the one who I believe can beat Bozo in the White House. And so I just hope that we come together as Democrats to pick the best qualified candidate. Again, it's about who's the most qualified to do the job, and I think that's Joe Biden.
But, Madam Ambassador, it's also about getting the nomination itself. And you know that the path to the Democratic nomination goes through black women, particularly the way that the primaries are stacked. Super Tuesday is full of primaries across the South. South Carolina is about 50% African Americans, or even maybe even more, voting in that primary. And black women really look at Anita Hill. She's the progenitor to the Me Too movement. She was somebody who stood almost alone in defying Clarence Thomas. If she's saying it's not good enough, doesn't Joe Biden have to do more than just say, I'm sorry for what happened to you? Can he get past the Anita Hill hurdle to actually get the nomination if he doesn't fix that?
Well, you know, I'm not here to advise Joe Biden on television. Having said that, I hope he can reconcile with her. You're right, she is a role model for so many. She's been a heroine, a shero, if you will, for so many people, including myself. So she has really put it on the line for women and for women's rights. But I say to you, and I can't emphasize this enough, I hold my feminist credentials, my civil rights credentials up against anybody in this country, including Dr. Hill. And so, having said that, whether you can talk about black women as being the route to the White House, I agree with you on that. And I'm hopeful that black women all over this country, that women, period, will look at Joe Biden's qualifications, look at his record, what he's done. I mean, the Anita Hill thing is a moment in time that does not bode well for him. But here's a man who has put himself on the line for women, for peoples and working people over the 20-odd years, more than that actually. He's put himself out there. He's been a giver. He's given more than he's taken, and he's always tried to do the right thing. And so I think and I've worked close and personal with him for 6 years in the Senate, and even afterwards we stayed in connection. And so I have every confidence that this man has got the judgment, has got the instincts, has got the heart, has got the capacity to do the job that we need to have done for our entire country. And that's why I'm standing with him.
All right. Well, Ambassador Carol Moseley Braun, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking some time.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, let's bring in our panel. Jamil Smith is a senior writer for Rolling Stone. Elie Mystal, editor at AboveTheLaw.com. And Nayyera, former White House senior director in the Obama administration. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to come to Jamil for your reaction, because the reality is that, you know, the risk for Joe Biden running for president has always been that he's right now held in such high regard, particularly by Democrats, by African Americans. He was Barack Obama's, you know, ride or die, like, bestie. And so he gets that Obama glow now. Right. But once you run for president, look, Hillary Clinton was very popular before she ran for president, and then people started picking her apart and taking her apart and dismantling her. The dismantling for Joe Biden starts with the Anita Hill situation, and then it goes from there. Is he going to be able, in your view, to shake that off?
Well, I mean, it would help if he actually apologized. He should start there. He hasn't actually apologized for what he's done. And what he did was he failed to do his job. He failed to call the corroborating witnesses that would have helped her, that were available to her to help corroborate her case. So the fact is, he left her in a position where it was a he said, she said, and, you know, basically made it so that the situation was worse for her and more deleterious for her. So the fact is that, yes, he could not have stopped the Republicans from asking the questions that they did, but he could have made the situation better for her. Now, to that point, you know, there are other things that he's got to contend with. He's got to contend with the allegations of inappropriate behavior. He's got to contend with the fact that he was behind the 1994 crime bill. He's got to contend with a number of other things that are going to make it more difficult for him with black voters and black women specifically.
Do you think he'll get the same opprobrium on the crime bill that Hillary Clinton did? Because she was first lady. lady, and a lot of woke folks held the crime bill against her. She didn't vote for it. She was first lady.
I hope so. He helped write it.
He helped write it. Well, Elie Mystal, because the fact that Joe Biden was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, ipso facto, Democrats controlled the United States Senate at that time, right? That's why he wasn't the ranking member. And so you had Clarence Thomas, who has been one of the most hostile to voting rights of any of the Supreme Court justices, despite being the only African-American justice, and has been hostile to, workers' rights versus corporate rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, on and on and on, and who African-Americans feel is not really looking out necessarily aggressively for their interests. Joe Biden was one of the Democrats who helped make sure that he got on the court, right? Well, because so is that going to wind up being an issue?
I mean, Joe Biden did vote against Clarence Thomas. I mean, he's not a bad guy. Like, I don't want to so jump up and down on Biden because he might be the nominee. And if he's the nominee, I'm going to vote for him because he's not a bigoted lunatic like the current president. So I'm going to vote for anybody, right? So I don't want to completely jump up and down on him. It's just that the theory of Joe Biden's candidacy is exhausting, right? Like, his candidacy is basically like, remember when white men used to stand for something? And it's just, even his supporters do not point to specific policies or platforms about Joe Biden that they like. They just kind of look at his general package and say, that's what it's going to take to beat Trump. Why? Like, what's his, one thing we know about Joe Biden, as you and Jamil are already kind of pointing out, one thing we know about him is that he's very bad at running for president. He's lost multiple times in the past. Is he going to be better at reaching Midwestern voters than Amy Klobuchar, who's from the Midwest and wins Midwestern elections by like wide margins? Is he going to be better at rebuilding the Obama coalition than Cory Booker, who's trying so hard to be Obama that I think he's about to ask Michelle on a date? Like, what is it? I don't get it. Of course I get it, but like, what else is it?
Michelle on a date, that was, okay. That's going to be on Twitter later. Let me let Nayyera have a crack at this, because the theory that Joe Biden is putting forward, essentially, is that he can win back. He's the guy from Scranton. He can win back white working class voters. It's the theory that Democrats have been basically running on since Lyndon Johnson left the White House, right? That somehow they will go back and find the white working class voter and draw them back into the party. It's the thing they want to do, and they're very obsessed with it. So he can do that, supposedly, and African-American voters like him. And let me just show you a little bit of his announcement video where he sort of went at what he is promoting as the core of his candidacy, which is to restore a certain amount of integrity to the way that race and other issues are played in America. Here it is.
A brave young woman lost her life. And that's when we heard the words of the President of the United States that stunned the world and shocked the conscience of this nation. He said there were, quote, some very fine people on both sides. Very fine people on both sides? With those words, the President of the United States assigned a moral equivalence between those spreading hate and those with the courage to stand against it. And in that moment, I knew the threat to this nation was unlike any I had ever seen in my lifetime.
Now, Nayyera, it being Biden, there was a glitch, right? Heather Heyer's mom came out and said, he didn't call me, and he didn't mention my daughter's name, and then he fixed that. So, right, there was a sort of Biden-y glitch. But to make kind of his point, then it triggered Donald Trump to do this. Take a look.
Oh, I've answered that question, and if you look at what I said, you will see that that question was answered perfectly. And I was talking about people that went because they felt very strongly about the monument to Robert E. Lee, a great general, whether you like it or not. He was one of the great generals. I've spoken to many generals here, right at the White House, and many people thought of the generals. They think that he was maybe their favorite general. People were there protesting the taking down of the monument of Robert E. Lee. Everybody knows that.
Oh, yeah, Robert E. Lee was a vicious slaveholder. You're a witness. I mean, it's kind of, Trump makes the point that Biden's trying to make, that, look, Biden says Charlottesville, Trump doubles down on very fine people.
And that's the great part of Biden being able to trigger Donald Trump, and why so many people are looking at him as the foil for Donald Trump, right? He's the nostalgia candidate for Democrats who want to appeal to the better sensibilities of a time of potentially Bill Clinton, right? The idea of a centrist Democrat who gets along with folks and can appeal to the white working class. So if the theory of the case that this primary is about who can you elect that will beat Donald Trump, then a lot of people could see that Biden would be the great general election candidate. But if the theory of the case is that a primary is about the new direction of the party and about fundamental change of the system, then Biden becomes the establishment guy. He's not the person who's looking to really shake things up and change things for people who think that things have been broken for a very long time. It's the difference between an open seat election, which Obama had when he won, when really you can feel free to vote for who you like, and the difference between an incumbent election when many people are scared because of what they see in the White House, don't want to vote for what they like, and want to vote instead for what they think everybody else will do, and that's the big electability question. In terms of electability, yes, we have not elected a woman president yet, but in 2018, 60% of the seats that were flipped by women who are running for office. The Democratic Party has nominated a woman in the past, and women are moving forward in ways that we haven't seen before in politics. So there is a positive momentum for change. It's just a matter of how people are going to be scared of the Trump specter.
That's a very good point, an excellent point. It's that it's not about so much what you would do. People are afraid of what other people will do. And so people are sort of making a calculation, what will my neighbor prefer, right? And so you have the Bs all getting a leg up because they are white and male, and people assume, well, my neighbor will only vote for someone like that. Right. Jamil, that's kind of what Elizabeth Warren was pushing back on in Houston.
Indeed, but I think to counter Nayyera's point a little bit, I think that, Joe Biden was playing right into Donald Trump's hands here. I mean, we were talking all week about Robert Mueller, and then all of a sudden we're talking about Robert E. Lee. And I think it plays into a misunderstanding of white identity politics that Trump used to get into the White House. Yeah. I think Joe Biden is really talking about what Donald Trump is saying, and instead of playing clips of family separation, of the neglect in Puerto Rico, of people held up by the Muslim ban, the racism that has been done by Donald Trump's policies. We're talking about what he said about Charlottesville 2 years ago in an op-ed that Joe Biden wrote about it. This is not really, a really intelligent interrogation of what Donald Trump's presidency has been about.
It's such an important point. Like, I just want people to really understand what Jamil just said. Donald Trump wants to make this election about who is going to be best for white men. He wants to fight on this ground. Democrats need to fight on the other ground of who's going to be best for everybody else.
Yeah, well, we'll see what people do, because fear is a big motivating factor in what people are saying, at least in these polls. Jamil Smith, thank you very much. Nayyera Hawk, thank you very much. Elie will be back later in the show. And coming up, states are fighting.